The river had always pulled. Not violently, not in a way that announced itself, but with a steady insistence that shaped everything living within it. Water moved, and life adjusted. Fish angled their bodies into the flow. Sediment shifted predictably. Even in the deepest channels, there was direction, a quiet force that told every creature where effort was required and where it was not. On this stretch of river, that force had weakened. The sturgeon drifted without resistance. He was enormous by the standards of freshwater fish, longer than a grown human, his body armoured with bony scutes that traced rigid lines from head to tail. His skin was dark, mottled with pale scars accumulated over decades. This was not a young animal. He had lived through floods, droughts, ice winters, and spawning runs that reshaped his muscles year after year. He knew the river by pressure. Normally, the current pressed against his sides continuously. It was how he measured speed, position, effort. He did not need to swim unless he chose to. The water carried him, and he corrected gently with slow movements of his tail and pectoral fins. Now there was almost nothing to correct. He hovered several meters above the riverbed, body level, fins barely moving. The water around him felt thick, heavy, but directionless. Fine sediment hung suspended instead of sliding along the bottom. Particles brushed his barbels and remained there longer than they should have. The river was stalling. Above him, the surface looked normal. From the banks, no one would have noticed anything unusual. Water still moved downstream. Reflections still broke against the current. But in the deep channel, where the sturgeon lived most of his life, the pull had weakened enough to change behaviour. He descended slowly, guided by gravity rather than flow. The riverbed came into view, a patchwork of sand, silt, and darker pockets where organic matter accumulated. Normally, scent trails from upstream drifted cleanly along the bottom, carrying information about food, other fish, and seasonal change. Now, smells layered and lingered. Old information mixed with new. The sturgeon's barbels brushed the substrate as he settled lower. He opened his mouth slightly, testing. The sediment lifted in a soft cloud, then failed to disperse. It hung, blurring edges, dulling contrast. This was wrong. Sturgeon fed by sensing vibration and pressure changes as much as taste. The river's movement usually delivered those signals clearly. Without flow, everything flattened. Prey did not announce itself properly. Distance became harder to judge. He stopped moving entirely. Drifting replaced swimming. His gills worked steadily, drawing water across surfaces evolved for oxygen-rich flow. The water still held oxygen, but less of it. Warmer layers from upstream releases and shallower tributaries had mixed unevenly. Stratification that once broke apart under strong current now persisted. He angled slightly upward, adjusting depth in search of pressure. Nothing changed. The river had been altered far upstream, dams regulating flow, withdrawals lowering volume, seasonal melt arriving earlier and weaker than it once had. None of this mattered individually. Together, they softened the river's spine. The sturgeon did not know the cause. He felt only the result. Time stretched in the deep channel. Without current to define effort, energy expenditure became unpredictable. Swimming forward required more intention. Letting go no longer guaranteed movement. He made a slow, deliberate sweep of his tail. Instead of being carried, he advanced only a short distance. The water closed behind him without urgency, swallowing the motion. The river did not push back. Above, a boat passed far overhead, its vibration faint and delayed. The sound arrived muted, distorted by layers of water that no longer moved cleanly. The sturgeon registered it, then let it fade. He had survived longer than most creatures in this river ever would. His species evolved for patience, for waiting out changes measured in seasons and decades. But rivers were not supposed to hesitate. As he drifted again, suspended between surface and bottom, the absence of pull forced a choice he had rarely faced. move deliberately or remain where he was and let conditions decide. The current did not answer. It did not guide. It simply failed to take him anywhere. And in the deep, quiet channel, the sturgeon continued to drift, not carried, not resisted, in a river that no longer held him the way it once had. The sturgeon remained in the deep channel as the light above shifted. From below, day and night were never sharply defined. Changes arrived as gradients, slight differences in brightness filtering down through meters of water altered by sediment, surface movement, and weather upstream. Usually, those changes rode on the current. They passed by, carried downstream like everything else. Now they lingered. The sturgeon angled his head slightly upward, sensing the faint increase in light as clouds thinned above the river. The water around him did not respond. No surge followed. No subtle change in pressure signaled movement. Direction had become optional. He moved his pectoral fins in a slow, deliberate rhythm, testing. The water displaced but did not guide him. His massive tail swept once, then again, producing thrust that felt strangely isolated, effort without assistance. He advanced only a short distance before stopping. Sturgeon were not built for sustained swimming. Their bodies favoured gliding, correction, conservation. In strong rivers, they moved efficiently by aligning with flow, using minimal energy to maintain position or travel great distances. Here, alignment meant nothing. He descended again, closer to the bottom, where currents usually concentrated. The riverbed felt closer than before, not because depth had changed, but because suspended sediment reduced clarity. The bottom seemed to rise toward him, its outline blurred. His barbels brushed silt and gravel. He detected faint vibrations, insect larvae shifting, a small fish darting and stopping, but the signals lacked structure. Without flow, prey movements did not stretch into readable patterns. He tested the substrate with a slow opening of his mouth, drawing sediment inward. The taste was familiar, organic matter, traces of invertebrates, but the delivery was inefficient. The river was not bringing food to him. He closed his mouth and waited. Waiting had always been part of survival, but waiting used to happen within movement. The river carried time forward. Now, time pooled. The sturgeon drifted again, body level, fins barely moving. Microcurrents nudged him in conflicting directions, too weak to commit. He rotated slightly, then stopped. Upstream, water was being held back, released in controlled pulses that smoothed extremes but flattened flow. Seasonal melt that once surged through this channel now arrived slowly, diluted by reservoirs and early warming. Down here, the effect was stagnation. Oxygen levels remained sufficient, but not generous. The sturgeon adjusted his gill movements, opening them wider, increasing water flow through effort rather than current. It cost energy, small but constant. Energy mattered. He shifted depth again, rising toward a layer where cooler water lingered. Temperature gradients were uneven now, no longer mixed thoroughly by strong flow. He felt the difference along his flank, a slight relief, a denser layer pressing gently against his body. Still no pull. A faint vibration reached him from upstream, a distant gate opening at a dam, far away but transmitted through the river's body. In another time, that vibration would have preceded a surge. Now, it dissipated before reaching him fully. He responded out of habit, angling his body into where the current should have come from. Nothing followed. The sturgeon held position, muscles engaged unnecessarily, then relaxed. The river had taught him that effort would be met with assistance. That lesson no longer applied. He drifted sideways, rotating slowly, a movement that would have been corrected instantly by a strong flow. Instead, he completed the turn, facing a new direction without having travelled anywhere meaningful. This was the danger. Without direction, movement wasted energy. Without pull, navigation lost context. Migration depended on gradients. Pressure, temperature, flow, all softened now. He descended once more to the riverbed and settled there, body resting lightly against the substrate. Fine silt rose around him, then remained suspended, clouding his immediate space. He did not attempt to clear it. The river was not helping. Above him, the surface continued its illusion of motion, reflecting sky and shoreline, hiding the stillness below. Boats passed, birds landed and lifted away. To an observer, the river flowed. In the deep channel where the sturgeon lived, it no longer decided. And as he lay there, ancient and patient, the absence of current forced a quiet recalibration, a recognition that survival might now require more movement, not less, in a river that refused to take him where it once had. If you want, I can continue with Chapter 3, focusing on physiological strain and long-term consequences, or expand this chapter further for longer narration pacing. Stillness began to demand effort. In a river with a strong current, remaining in place is an active negotiation. Water presses against the body, and the fish responds with small corrections, a tilt of the head, a slow sweep of the tail. Energy is spent, but it is shared with the river. The force comes from outside as much as within. Here, in the deep channel, that balance was gone. The sturgeon lay near the bottom, his armoured body resting lightly against the substrate. Fine silt coated the edges of his scutes, dulling their outlines. Normally, the current would have cleared it away within seconds. Now, it remained, settling into seams and grooves, adding weight he had not evolved to carry. He lifted himself slightly, pushing upward with a measured movement of his fins. The water did not assist. He hovered just above the bottom, muscles engaged continuously to prevent sinking back down. What had once been a passive state became active labour. His pectoral fins angled outward, making minute adjustments that consumed energy with no return. Oxygen demand increased. Without flow to deliver water across his gills efficiently, the sturgeon widened the openings, drawing water through by muscular action alone. Each cycle required effort. The water still held oxygen, but less than before, warmed by slow-moving surface layers, diluted by stagnant pockets. His heart rate increased subtly. Sturgeon hearts are adapted for endurance, for long periods of low-intensity activity, but even endurance systems rely on predictability. The absence of current removed that. He shifted position again, drifting upward toward a cooler layer, then descending when it thinned. Each adjustment cost more than it should have. His movements grew more deliberate, more conservative. Food remained scarce. In flowing water, prey arrives. In still water, prey hides. Invertebrates burrowed deeper into the substrate. Small fish held position near structure, no longer swept into the open. The sturgeon tested the bottom again with his barbels, searching for vibration. Signals were weak. He opened his mouth and drew in sediment, filtering it slowly. The return was minimal, a few soft-bodied organisms, not enough to offset the energy spent feeding. He released the remaining silt, which drifted upward and refused to disperse. The river no longer reset itself. Time passed without markers. Without current, hours and days felt similar. Light changes above arrived slowly and lingered longer than they should have. Temperature shifts stacked rather than cycling cleanly. The sturgeon remained patient. Patience was not choice, it was design. But even patience has limits when conditions stop cycling. A faint vibration arrived again from upstream, not water, but machinery. A controlled release began somewhere far away. This time, the sturgeon felt a slight change in pressure. It was subtle, delayed, and uneven, but it was something. He responded immediately, angling his body, orienting himself out of habit more than certainty. The current touched him briefly, not as a push, but as a suggestion. For a short time, water moved past his flank in a single direction. Sediment lifted and slid. Oxygen delivery improved. The sturgeon adjusted, conserving energy, allowing the flow to do what it once had naturally. Then it faded. The release ended before reaching him fully. The river returned to its suspended state. The sturgeon drifted again, suspended between effort and rest, aware now of the difference. The brief return of current had reminded his body what assistance felt like, and what was missing. He descended slowly and settled once more, conserving what energy remained. Migration would not happen today. Perhaps not this season. The river, altered but not silent, continued to exist without committing to movement. And the sturgeon, older than the structures that now controlled his world, endured in a deep channel where holding still cost more than swimming, and where the current, once constant, had become unreliable enough to change the meaning of survival itself. Change arrived without warning and without continuity. For most of the sturgeon's life, the river's behaviour had been gradual. Water levels rose and fell over days. Currents strengthened and weakened with seasons. Even floods, violent as they were, followed a logic: pressure building, release, then settling. This river no longer did that. The first surge came abruptly. Without the usual advance signals of snowmelt or rain-swollen tributaries, a pulse of colder water reached the deep channel. The sturgeon felt it as a sudden tightening along his flank, a brief, unmistakable grip that pressed against his scutes and carried sediment forward. He reacted instantly, aligning his body, allowing the current to take some of his weight. For several minutes, the river behaved like itself again. Sediment slid along the bottom in thin sheets. Fine particles cleared from the water around him. Pressure returned to his lateral line, restoring depth and direction. Oxygen delivery improved as water passed more efficiently across his gills. He moved with it, not swimming, not fighting, simply allowing the flow to re-establish the relationship that had defined his existence. His tail swept once, then again, small corrections layered onto the river's effort. Then the surge fractured. The flow did not taper or stabilize. It broke into uneven streams, some pushing harder than others, twisting around submerged structures, leaving pockets of stillness in between. The sturgeon was forced to adjust constantly. He drifted into a faster thread of water, then slid out of it without warning. His orientation shifted repeatedly, requiring rapid corrections that sturgeon bodies were not built to make efficiently. This was not a river in motion. It was a river operating in segments. The surge weakened as quickly as it had arrived. Pressure dropped unevenly. Sediment settled again, but not where it had been before. The bottom reshaped itself slightly, redistributing fine material into shallow drifts and hollows. The sturgeon slowed and descended, seeking stability near the bed. His muscles burned faintly now, not from exertion, but from constant correction. Energy reserves had been tapped more deeply than usual. The brief assistance of the current had cost more than it gave because it demanded readiness that could not be sustained. Another pulse arrived hours later. This one was warmer. It slid over cooler layers rather than mixing cleanly, creating a boundary the sturgeon could feel clearly along his side. Temperature stratification sharpened. Oxygen levels varied sharply with depth. He rose slightly, then descended again, testing. Each movement yielded different feedback. None of it lasted. Above, releases continued, controlled, intentional, disconnected from weather and season. The river no longer responded to land, it responded to schedules. Down here, the effect was fragmentation. The sturgeon remained near the bottom, conserving energy between pulses. When a surge arrived, he oriented, corrected, endured. When it faded, he settled again. There was no rhythm to learn. This was the most costly change of all. Adaptation requires pattern. Without it, even experienced bodies struggle. Muscles fatigued faster. Sensory systems delivered conflicting information. Decisions arrived too late or too early. The sturgeon's world, once defined by a constant downstream pull, had become a series of interruptions. As night passed into another day, the river continued to move, but never as a whole, only in pieces. And in the deep channel, the sturgeon persisted, ancient and heavy, adjusting again and again to a river that could no longer decide whether it was flowing or not.